Guidance. Michelle, are you there?
I am here, Brother Eric. Om Shanti, everyone. Om Shanti, Brother Eric and Sister Gayatri and everyone. That was just so lovely, that music. I'm in a good place right now. It really was inspiring and wonderful. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And tonight's going to be no less wonderful the whole night. I can just tell the topic alone, nurturing true independence, as we wind down the month of July. And that's really, for me, what July is about, freedom and liberty. And tonight, this is the last of our July series, and we are joined by Sister Gayatri, no less. And it's about life and liberty. And it made me think a little bit. We live in a land of the free and the brave, but I was thinking, are we really free? Do we really have liberty for ourselves? And I think about the shackles of convention and the shackles of societies dictating to us how we're supposed to act and speak, and especially in social media, and shaming, and the chains of our own fears of loss, and just how sometimes our own lack of self-esteem and how that ruminates. So in a land that is supposedly free, whatever that means right now, it's something to think about. And I had a conversation with Sister Gayatri before this, and I'm not going to tip my hand because I'm very excited, because the subject, how she's going to address this most complex, profound, and wonderful subject is going to be through a book that I'd never heard of, I'm embarrassed to say. But it's an allegory, but I did study it a little bit, and I'm like, wow, this is very powerful. So I think we're going to get a lot of answers tonight and see together whether we can explore what liberty in our own lives truly will look like, can look like, I should say. So just for those, everyone knows Sister Gayatri, if you've been here before, and I know most of you have, if not, Sister Gayatri is dedicated her life to exploring the spiritual dimension of personal development and growth through the study of Raja Yoga, which is the main pillar, if you will, of the Brahma Kumaris. She is a representative of the Brahma Kumaris at the UN. And I'm going to do a plug at the end for tomorrow, which is Peace in the Park. So remind me. And her focus is transformation through spirituality. And she serves as the vice chair of the International Day of the Yoga Committee of the United Nations. So who better than to talk about what we strive for most, which is peace and liberty and freedom in our own lives. Welcome, Sister Gayatri.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And first of all, let me just check in to see if my voice is loud enough, because there's been some messages saying that the sound was a bit low. So I was hearing you quite well. So I hope that the sound is better now. But I think it was such an appropriate opening, both your words, Michelle, but also that voice of that Brooklyn girl who is like a thunder when she opens her mouth to sing, and especially on social issues. And I've never heard that about that song on Lady Liberty. And actually, I was in a way connecting to Lady Liberty all day while thinking about what I'm going to say. So it was an appropriate song for to open up this session, because when one thinks about what one is going to say on such issues as nurturing true independence, which was the theme for the whole of July, one cannot help but bring it to the personal. Because when one thinks of freedom, whether it was Gandhi or whether it was Nelson Mandela, they were thinking of freedom more from the context of themselves. So I think that for Nelson Mandela, when he looked at freedom and he looked at liberty, He got his most profound realizations when he was in the cell on Robben Island. For Mahatma Gandhi, of course, I'm sure a lot of that came when he was imprisoned and left with himself. Basically, that's the point I'm making. And wrote about experiments with truth. So I think there's something to be said about coming back to the personal when we're looking at something like life and liberty. But this morning, I found in my inbox an article from the New York Times, and I wanted to open with this because the theme seems to be connected very closely to this. As you said, what is freedom in the land of the free and the home of the brave in today's world? And so what the New York Times article was addressing was the world of social media, was the IT and the internet. And they said that the mantra for 2022 is no one knows anything. And the most used word within that area of the IT is uncertainty. Now, this is from the New York Times this morning. So I thought, how interesting, the mantra for 2022, no one knows anything. And the word that is most used so far for this year is uncertainty. So I share this because this evening's topic is a little bit like this. When you ask people about life and liberty in the land of the free and the home of the brave, I suppose this is what they're going to say. No one knows anything, and there's great uncertainty. So I'd like, as Michelle said, to take up the subject of life and liberty within the frame of this classic, which I came to know just recently, called The Pilgrim's Progress. And it's written by John Bunyan. And for those of you who have read The Pilgrim's Progress, and I think no one of you have done so and would be curious enough to read it, would know that it centers around a character called Christian. So that tells you it's coming from a Christian perspective and about his spiritual journey. And the spiritual journey is a little bit like, I suppose, what we have in Raj Yoga. It was moving from the city of destruction to the celestial city. So we would call moving from the Iron Age to the Golden Age. But he was doing this in the midst of uncertainty. And in the midst of uncertainty, he was asked to stay on the straight and narrow way, or the straight and narrow path, if he wanted to move from this city of destruction to the celestial city. But along the way, Christian encountered a number of illusions that he needed to confront. Illusions that were portrayed with names, with identities, and with personalities unique to the special illusion. So I'll give you the example of two illusions that he had to face on this journey of life and liberty from a city of destruction, which means all our liberties are quickly dissolving into nothingness, we're losing them, to a place in which he would have liberation in life. He would have life and liberty. And so these illusions were given such a richness to them that we could understand what we have to face when we're looking at things like liberty and life. So one of the illusions was called worldly wise man, a worldly wise man. Now, the worldly wise man referred to the ego that he would have had to face, the ego of always knowing what's best for others, and with the arrogance of thinking he knows what's best for others, he would lead them astray from the straight and narrow path that would lead them to this liberty, to life and liberty. The other illusion that was, again, dressed up with a personality was Mr. Legality. And Mr. Legality was the one who prides himself in knowing all the laws of life and imposed those laws on people's lives because he knew how best people could live them out and what was good for them and not good for them. So, for me, these two, why I chose these two as examples, because I think this is what is happening in the name of a worldly wisdom or being the worldly wise man or woman. It's the ego that is being played out, and that ego is taking away people's freedom. It's taking away what that Statue of Liberty stands for. Mr. Legality is the one who is making it the law, taking away someone's freedom and then doing it under the guise of this is the law of the land. And so I thought that that was two very interesting things. And so Christian, the pilgrim, had to encounter all these different illusions and all these different tests along the way. But what was very interesting, and I think it's very interesting for all pilgrims when we're talking about life and liberty, and that is the preparation that the pilgrim is required to have when embarking on this spiritual journey of life and liberty, especially when we want to move from a city of destruction that is taking away our basic rights to a city of liberation in life. Then there is a sense of being prepared to take this journey and having a deeper sense of what are we getting involved with. What are the things that perhaps I will have to encounter along the way that I don't know anything about before I start this journey? So for me, in churning about what I want to share with you today, I felt that when it comes to life and to liberty, we have been living life and liberty within a secular context throughout generations. So we always saw our lives were determined by external factors, such as the social fabric, such as the economic fabric, such as the political fabric, such as the environmental fabric. All of those things would determine the quality of our lives. And of course, our liberty was then determined by the Declaration of Independence, by the Constitution, by the Human Rights Declaration. So we always saw it within a context of Mr. Legality and Mr. Worldly Wiseman. And so now when we are looking at something that is slowly evading us and something that we're beginning to feel so helpless about, I think it is time for us to look at it from the spiritual sense. And for the pilgrim, and each one of us tonight is a pilgrim. And so I'll take you through a kind of a journey. But the journey itself is not that you're starting the journey, but the journey is more prepping for the journey, to prepare you to walk this path, to walk this way. And so the pilgrim, each one of us, have got to examine life and liberty in relation to our own personal journey, and perhaps have the aim of integrating the spiritual with the secular in order to understand the deepest significance of what life and liberty is all about in today's world. So I'd like to share with you 5 principles that I think a pilgrim needs in order to grasp and to be able to recognize the journey, but also using these principles to recognize the illusions that the pilgrim would meet on his way of life and liberty. So The first principle, according to, of course, these principles are set within the context of Raj Yoga, principles that we are called upon as we walk the path. And life and liberty for us is, of course, life, the soul, walking the path toward liberation and liberation in life. So liberty is actually liberation in life, and freedom would be like liberation. And so the purity would be the first principle that we would be called on to understand, something that it's not just a principle, but it's a principle that's got to be embodied by the person, by the pilgrim. So in observing these principles, and I'll share 5 with you, the pilgrim and the principle become one, an integrated whole. So the first principle is the principle of purity, and it's a very simple principle, and it begins with our thoughts. Every thought that is created in an inner field of concentrated silence is pure and fruitful, and it brings success. So I was a bit amused when I heard Barbara Streisand singing that, liberty is not, doesn't support the sound of silence. It's about sound. So I do believe that purity, this principle of purity, is not to stop one from taking a stance or taking a position. And so therefore, to be silenced, but it is a spiritual domain that one uses to create thoughts. It's an inner field that one uses to create thought, so that from that concentrated silence, the thought that gets created has got a fruitful and successful impact. So that is the spiritual principle, and what it does align to in how the world describes liberty is that the world describes liberty as an internal freedom, a freedom not to be enslaved by our own appetites, our own desires, our own needs, and our own wants. So this freedom of a pure thought gives us the freedom. And that freedom that pure thought gives us, when it is created in the concentrated silence of the soul, the fruit that it brings is the liberty. And that liberty is, I break the shackles of being enslaved by my own limitations, by my own fears, by my own appetites, desires, needs, and wants. The second is company. The second principle of life and liberty is the company I keep. So the spiritual principle is always keep yourself safe from the influences of your own misconceptions and from the misconceptions of others, and also of their opinion. Why? Because what is liberty? Liberty is a state of being free from unnecessary restrictions. So my own misconceptions and the opinions and misconceptions of others create restrictions inside of me. And liberty means that we are not owned by another person, neither are we owned by any of the powers that may be. And so that is liberty. And it depends on what I'm being influenced by as a soul, and whose company am I constantly living in? Who am I being influenced? Who am I thinking of? Whose thoughts patterns are impacting me, and how is it taking away my liberty? The third is self-respect. That's the third spiritual principle. And self-respect is always to maintain your own inner self-respect so that you can make your own choices. So whether you call it self-esteem or self-respect, it is an inner principle of the self, of life, that allows me to make sensible choices. And how does that connect to liberty? Liberty is a state of being free, free to make one's own choices, free to experience one's own life. It gives us the right, liberty gives us the right to believe, to act, and to express ourselves freely. The fourth spiritual principle of life and liberty for me is to take every step. Let every one of my steps be taken as one of wisdom in action. So if I see each and every step along this way to be an action, then let it be connected to something wise. Because what is liberty? Liberty is also to freely pursue joy and to live your life in a way that makes you happy. But here is where the action comes in. And that is as long as you don't violate the rights of others. So that is liberty. Liberty isn't to do anything, anywhere, anyhow, and it doesn't matter how that impacts others, but it means I don't violate the rights of others. And then the fifth spiritual principle is about strength and support and making faith your foundation. And this is where the Statue of Liberty comes in, because what's engraved on the Statue of Liberty, we all know that. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. So that's the strength and support we want, so that we could allow the masses yearning to breathe free, to breathe free. And that is why Peace in the Park, which Michelle is going to be talking about, the first one we're having in person, since COVID since 2019 to 2022, we have had Breathe Peace. And so this is what life and liberty is all about, to breathe free, to breathe peace. So each one of these 5 principles represent what I would call a room that a pilgrim has to enter. He or she has to enter this kind of internal room to reflect on what each principle means and how it will help to navigate the journey back to life and liberty, and how the pilgrim and the principle would become one integrated whole, because I just can't be a person living by a principle, but I don't own that principle. So I'll take you through a few rooms, and hopefully, and I'd like you to reflect with me, you yourself being a principle, a pilgrim, and how these principles would impact you. And hopefully I'll have time to take you all through all of the 5. If not, I'll take you at least some of them, but I think I'll have the time. They're not very long. So for me, the room 1 that we have to enter is to look at our own portrait, our self-portrait of purity. Because if purity is the first principle, I must look first in the room of my self-portrait of purity. So looking at my self-portrait of purity, I, the pilgrim, may see a few things in looking at myself. When I'm looking at myself from a pure consciousness, when I'm free from all the limitations, when I'm looking at life through the lens of liberty, I would see love radiating from my eyes. I would see myself like the Statue of Liberty with a silent presence, but represents such a strong message. I will see truth emerging from my lips. And I will see not just holding up a flame, but I will see a whole aura of light radiating from my entire being. As a pilgrim, when I enter into that room, into that inner room of reflection, I will become attentive to that very first principle that I spoke to you about. A principle that calls on me to create every thought in an inner field of concentrated silence so that the impact of it could be fruitful and could bring success. The caution that I, the pilgrim, would have is that I'm aware that there will be many illusions, and these illusions would be living in my mind. They would be living in this, in the soul, because illusions are created from within me. And so the reason I would look through this lens of liberty, look through the lens of purity to see the purity of liberty, it's because I don't want to be enslaved by any of the illusions that are living within me. And so I want to, when I'm walking the clear and straight path of life and liberty, I want to be savvy. I want to be, like spiritually smart to be able to pick them up before they come in disguise and take me off the straight and narrow. So that's one of the rooms we have to go in, and we have to look at what it is we are enslaved by, and we have to clean it up at the level of thought. We have to clean it up so it doesn't infiltrate our thoughts, because one of the way that liberty gets tampered with is when we begin to think through, or we begin to create thoughts through fields of desires, fields of needs, fields of wants, and all the different types of likes and dislikes or appetites. And so in order to remove all those influences, we must begin to understand the field within us, that awareness, that soul consciousness that we keep talking about, that from which our thoughts get created. And that would be liberating us. It would be like a true liberty to live our lives, because we're taking back the control, the reins. So that's what I have to see in this first room of purity that I'm entering in, so that I could prepare myself to walk the path with these strong, powerful thoughts. The second room that the pilgrim would need to enter is a room that I call the dusty room. It's a dusty space. And as the pilgrim enters into this second inner room to prepare himself or herself for the journey, sometimes you might be confronted by a lot of dust. It's as though when you enter into this inner room, the dusty space, it's as though someone is sweeping, and all the thick layers of dust that's arising from the sweeping up that's going on in this inner room causes the pilgrim to choke. And while choking on the dust, the pilgrim is wondering, what is this all about? Where is this dust coming from? But then the pilgrim would realize that this room that is so full of dust, that is limiting the soul's ability to be free, it represents the pure heart of the soul. And what's living in the soul, in the pure heart of the soul, is all the dust of sorrow, of uncertainty, of trauma, of doubt. All of this is like dust in the soul. And all that dust now has clogged the heart of the soul. So the soul, the heart of the soul no longer has the liberty to trust, the liberty to feel the strength that the soul would need from the support of the heart, from the support of its feelings, because the soul is so filled with guilt and with grief. And so the important thing for the pilgrim to understand in order to get to this life and liberty is to remember the second principle. And the second principle is to always keep yourself safe from the influences of the company that you keep, because you don't want to be enslaved by another person, or you don't want to be enslaved by another power. And so the pilgrim realizes that this path to life and liberty would require him to experience what true feelings really mean and to recognize his true authentic self, because this is very, very essential to removing the traps of attachments that live in the heart, and to remember that what the heart needs for this journey of life and liberty is the nectar, the nourishing nectar of love, of compassion, and of forgiveness. The third room that the pilgrim needs to go in to prepare for the journey of life and liberty is what I call patience and passion. And I think John Bunyan also called it this. And going into this, when the pilgrim goes into this third room to prepare himself, he would encounter two mirrors on the wall, side by side. And it is as if when he looks into these two mirrors, he's seeing a split personality image of himself. In one mirror, he would see himself as patience. What he would see is that he's calm, he's composed, he's confident, and he's content. In the other mirror, he would see himself as an advocate, passionate to go out and fix the world. So he would see himself as restless and agitated, and as discontented and nervous. So these two images he knows would exist as he walks the path, but he knows the path to life and liberty is, even though he may be passionate about certain things in life as he sees them, and he wants to go out there and fix them, he must remember that he has to be patient. And patience is virtue, because patience reminds him, reconnects him to his self-respect. Because it is only when he is aligned with his self-respect will he be able to make choices. So the pilgrim has to remember the self-respect, and to remember that if he wants to make a choice that would keep him on the straight and narrow to life and liberty, he needs to always remember his self-respect. The fourth room that the pilgrim would enter, and this is, of course, as you would notice, you're going deeper and deeper. The pilgrim is going deeper and deeper to prepare himself for this journey. I call it the fireplace. And even before, and I think this is where people prefer to hold on to their bondages and their barriers and to everything that takes away their liberties, to take away their freedom, because they feel it's too hot a space. It's too much. I can't deal with it. So entering this space, this inner room that's called the fireplace, which is the fourth room that the pilgrim must enter before he starts this journey, is this huge fireplace that when he enters the room, he sees this huge fireplace. And the thing is, in observing what he is afraid of, what is the heat he is feeling from this fireplace, he realizes that what is the heat is that he's seeing people standing around this fireplace, and they're throwing something into the fire that is getting the fire higher, to burn higher and burn hotter. But in taking a close look, he realized what they're throwing into the fire is oil. So the oil is making the fire burn brighter, hotter, and making the fire burn higher, because they're not throwing water. And so what is this? What is the oil that they are throwing into the fire? And what they're throwing into the fire that makes it burn so hot is they're throwing the oil of revenge, of retaliation, of chaos, of confrontation, of violence, of victimization, of inequality, and of injustice. And all of this is shrinking liberty. And so then he thinks about the fourth principle. And he remembers that the fourth principle says to him that you have to have benevolent actions, that each step you're going to take on this way must be one of wisdom in action, because life and liberty does include the pursuit of happiness. But happiness is to freely pursue joy and to live life in a way that would make you happy, but remember the caution, as long as you don't violate the rights of others. And so these benevolent actions would be actions that are grounded in the spiritual wisdom of brotherhood. And that would be benevolent actions would be actions that would bring peace, that would bring harmony, that would bring love, that would bring justice, that would bring equality. And of course, these benevolent actions should not violate that of others, because they have those rights too. And then the final room, and I think this is the crucial room before we step out and start our spiritual journey. And I call this room the centerpiece, because usually the deeper we go into ourselves, before we actually start believing in ourselves, we have to have a conversation with ourselves. It's as though we have to remember certain things that we have forgotten about what life and liberty is all about. So as we enter this other room, which I call the centerpiece, it's actually a dark room. It sometimes feels dark and empty. It sometimes makes us feel we're entering into a space of loneliness. And so as a pilgrim, as I enter, but I do have to enter the space to see what is going on in this fifth room. And as I enter the space, I may have to blink a little bit. I may have to get accustomed to the darkness. And I may have to concentrate on the image of myself that is in the center of this room. An image that may be looking lonely, maybe alone, maybe sad, maybe all those things. An image that may be staring down at the ground because I don't know what to do, how to live in this world anymore. But then the pilgrim, because the pilgrim's intention is to move out of the city of destruction into this city, this celestial city, which we call liberation in life, life and liberty, there is this hope, that hope of the Statue of Liberty, that flame of hope. That flame of hope gets rekindled. And so the pilgrim, seeing this lonely form of him or herself, the flame of that hope rekindles in him or her something that makes them say, wait a minute, in the darkness of this space, I want to connect to the silver lining. I know that this silver lining is the hope. I know it's the flame of liberty. And so then the soul will have a conversation with itself. And this is the conversation I had with myself today when I got into, say, well, when I get into this dark room, what would be the conversation I would have with myself that would take me onto this path of life and liberty? So I said to this lonely figure in the dark room looking down sad, what are you doing here? And my own inner voice responded, I am now what I once was not. In other words, I've reached a state that I am not who I used to be. And then I asked myself, well, what's that? What is it that you used to, what is it that you have arrived at right now? And when I looked at life and liberty, I said, not only me, but the whole world. It's like we are in captivity. We're getting depressed and we're getting more miserable in this dark room. The world has become like a dark room. And I feel that I'm in an iron cage. I'm still chained to this iron age. And then I asked myself, well, how did you manage to get here? How did you manage to get chained by in this iron cage, in this dark room? And then I started looking at my acquired identity. What happened to me inside that took away, what happened to my life that took away my liberty? And the first thing I thought about is that I neglected to be aware and attentive of what life is. And as a result of that, I got controlled by things outside of me, whether you call it lust, whether you call it influences. And now all of those things are running free in my life. The other thing is I turned away from the truth and goodness of God's directions. And now I'm living in forgetfulness, and I'm not able to connect to what is real and authentic. The other thing I did was I flirted with temptation, and I was overcome by sensual pleasures. And actually, I would think what that person would be feeling, and I was trying to picture myself in that person's being, losing the liberty, their life and liberty, was that the heart is so hardened that the people that I cannot feel anymore. I cannot feel what true freedom is. I cannot feel what liberty is anymore. And then, of course, the fifth principle comes up in front of me, the pilgrim. And I remember the fifth principle of strength and support. It came flashing in front of my eye. And I remember what's written on the Statue of Liberty. And I remember that for faith, for strength and support, I need faith. And so then, in conclusion, what does the pilgrim do when it reaches this fifth room and sees itself in this state and realize that actually there were things that the pilgrim himself did at a very deep level that took away his own liberty. And so the strength and support was what the pilgrim would depend on, and faith was what would be the foundation for its journey. And so the pilgrim then, before he walks out that fifth inner room and starts walking the path to life and liberty, he looked upward to God, to the source, because he knew that it was from God, the source, that he will draw strength and support, because God is the one who is merciful, who's gracious, who's all forgiving. God is the one whose words would give the soul, the pilgrim, encouragement to believe again in the beauty of life and to experience true liberty. Then the pilgrim looked inwards, and he looked inwards for ways to connect to God, for strength, and to build a foundation in faith, a foundation of faith, but faith in the self, faith in God, faith in the journey that he's about to embark on, but ultimately faith in liberty, faith in what liberty represents. And so he knows that faith, the faith in all these things, he would draw support. And the support is one that's going to make him aware of the subtleties of attractions that would take him away from that strength and support. Because today, someone else would come and say, well, why? Mr. Worldly Wiseman would come and say, why are you bothering with God? Listen to what I have to say. Or Mr. Legality will say, well, the word of God doesn't have any saying. I will take the word of God and I will use the power. So, to take this liberty means to stay really close to the truth on the basis of your own experiences, so you could believe again in yourself and to believe in the authority of your own experiences. And then the pilgrim looks outwards And looking outwards, of course, when you're walking a path, you need to know what's around you. But in looking outwards, what he's looking at to stay on the straight and narrow path, and do not go back to being in the center of that dark room. Do not allow any of the vices to influence the soul in such a way that the soul is disheartened and will turn back and go into that dark room. So as the pilgrim looks outward, the pilgrim is going to not be careless. And so not to take things like life and liberty for granted, but to really know that life and liberty calls on me to walk a path, and that path to be driven by, or to be paved by these principles that I personally, as a pilgrim, will integrate into myself. So I think that at the end of the journey, before the pilgrim starts on this journey of life and liberty, the pilgrim would say to himself after this conversation and after walking out that fifth room, he would say, I think I now know the meaning of what life and liberty is all about. Now I'm ready to walk this long road with God as my guide and with God's wisdom as my steps. So I do hope that taking you on this journey and talking to you in a very different way this evening, I hope you saw yourself as a pilgrim and you saw the ways that you could prepare yourself on a daily basis to walk the way of life and liberty, because this is what we need to take back into our hands. And this is what we need to believe in again. Om Shanti.
Well, Sister Gayatri, I don't even want to say anything, because anything I say will sully your last 45 minutes of beautiful words. That was very profound, does not even begin to cover it. I think I know there are some questions, but I wanted to ask a question, if I may. You know, it's funny, the thing that kept, as you were talking, was the straight and narrow. You always think of that straight and narrow path, but what you brought up, it is a straight and narrow path. But I realized that every path is different for everyone else, but it's before you get to the straight and narrow path. That's really what it is. I always thought the straight and narrow path is just like A to B, but it's not. Before you even go A to B, you have to be prepared. And the difference, that's the different paths you take to get to that path. Does that make sense? Because once you get to that point, then the path can be straight and narrow, and then it's still your choice whether you stay on that path. But my question was, the path is, there are as many paths as there are souls, but is that true in the beginning, going to the different rooms, or even after the rooms, as the path is different for every soul? Is that too strange a question?
No, it is not strange a question, but what is the principles will be the same for all the souls.
That's cool.
But how the principles will be applied will very much be dependent on the soul's journey. And the pace, as you say, the movement and the speed of the soul. Mm-hmm. So when we are on the road, the movement of our cars and the speed of our cars, of our vehicles, is all dependent on who's driving it. And so therefore, when we get on the road of the straight and narrow, sometimes we do want to take detour. And in taking the detour, maybe our way of learning through those detours. But you still have to come back on the straight and narrow, which means you still have to come back to those principles that will take you to where you want to go. So I feel that the crucial thing for me in living a life of liberty is not to start with the journey in the sense that these are the principles and this is how I have to go out and live my life. But it is very important to do the prep work, to go in and look at what these principles mean to me first as an individual. And when I can kind of get a grip that this is how I identify with these principles, then it is easier for me to use them in the world out there as I live my life and believe in liberty, and in believing that liberty does exist. Then how am I going to live that life of liberation? Because that's what liberty means. Liberty means to live your life in liberation without violating the rights of others. So that's the key in the straight and narrow, and that's the principle that we have to understand. One of them.
It's absolutely true. The difference between dogma and spirituality is remarkable. And you talk about this with the worldly wise and Mr. Legality, which sometimes falls into dogma, you know, exactly. and religions. And it does interfere with the lives of others. So all these things were circulating as you were saying, and it was just wonderful. There are some comments here, powerful, profound, inspiring, an awareness of who we are. This is from Jane, removing the illusions, grateful to you. There is a question I see in the Q&A. Okay. Well, I guess the question is, if you feel that God has not been kind to you for whatever reason, what should you do? And I have my answer for that, but you know, and that's changed too, because I used to think that too, you know, why is God doing this to me? And subsequently through the years, even before I joined with the Brahma Kumaris, I kind of realized it's not God. God is the good guy. He always wants good for me. So I have to look inside and see what else is going on. And it's not God. But if you want to take that question, obviously it's bothering that person.
Yes. If God has not been kind to you for whatever reason, what should you do? I would say make friends with God. Make God your friend and have a conversation with God. And as a friend, if I have a friend and that friend for any reason hasn't been kind to me, I would have a conversation with them. I just wouldn't feel the unkindness was a judgment or the unkindness was a punishment. And this is why if I really do want to know who God is, it's got to be relational. It cannot just be a man on the moon or a man beyond the sky or a woman here, or, you know, however you see God. But definitely make God a friend and have a relationship with God. See God not as an energy. See God as a living being, a supreme being, and see yourself as a child of the supreme being. And just as how if you have an elderly in the family and you felt that that elderly was unkind to you, you would go because of your respect, because of your love, because of your trusting in their wisdom, and have that conversation with them. So this is what meditation is all about: connecting to God, having a heart-to-heart conversation with God, and telling God what's in your heart, especially if what's in your heart is something to do with him or her. And so go ahead, have that conversation, clear it, because God's nature is not to be unkind. And if I experience an unkindness from God, it's a blind spot that I have that I'd like to clear.
Wonderful. And I think you're right. I think what I had originally deemed as unkind, it was through conversation. I never let go of God's hand, but I did rail against him a little bit. I did say some, I don't want to say unkind words, but he came right back to me, and it very shortly after, everything changed. And this was many, many years ago. So I love that. Do have a conversation, and you'll see. It's beautiful. Well, Sherry always has a funny line. Some people's karma ran over their dogma. That's right.
So that's why we have to remove the dharma, the dogma, and we have to add in the dharma and karma to yoga. So
Exactly.
Dharma will be your principles, and your karma would be your actions, and your yoga would be your connection to God. And that makes it spiritual, because it's not about a dogma here. It's about an experience.
Exactly. Wonderful. You said a little laughter yoga could help too. So that I'm going to give another pitch. I'll see you tomorrow. But Sherry's in Florida. But if you are here and anyone's here, I know you want to be there tomorrow at Peace in the Park, because there are a lot of different ways to experiment with just what you were talking about. So it's going to be lovely. Well, before we close, it was like an hour-long meditation just hearing you speak. It really truly was. But if you could just give us a short meditation commentary before we close, and stay for announcements, everybody.
Okay, and I just want to comment on this question because it's quite interesting. Detours are going to happen, but we need to avoid dead ends. Well, in life and liberty, there are no dead ends. There are only life plateaus. So you would never reach a dead end. You'll just reach a life plateau, and it will take you to the other. And sometimes you stay with the plateau, but then it always takes you higher.
I apologize. I didn't see that question. So I'm glad you picked up on that. They're coming at us from all different directions. Thank you. Thanks.
All right. So you're asking, we're already over time. My gosh.
No, we're fine. We're fine. We're good. We're good.
Okay. So let me just do a very short meditation. Maybe I'll just concentrate on the principles. Let me, right? That I might just go through them again with you. And so sit comfortably in the quiet space of the first principle, that inner space of concentrated silence that lies in the inner field of soul consciousness. Experience liberty as internal freedom. Always keep yourself safe and protected in the company you choose. Liberty is a state of being free, free from unnecessary restrictions. Always look at life with respect. Maintain your self-respect. And from self-respect, make your own choices. Liberty is to experience your own life, to have the right to believe to act, and to express yourself freely. Benevolent actions are essential to life. Let your every step be taken as one of wisdom in action. Liberty is to freely pursue the joy of life and to live in a way that makes you happy and to make others happy. There is strength and support in life. My strength and support come from one source. And from that source, there's faith in my foundation. In the home of the brave and in the land of the free, the Lady of Liberty stands with her flame of hope. The flame reminds us that the strength and support that comes from the one source, God, is the one who says to us, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free. With the strength and support from one source, we are able to breathe free, to live our lives in liberation, to live in life and liberty. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. Thank you for that bouquet. It was like a bouquet when I was sitting with you. I actually could smell the fragrance. It was the first time I actually had fragrance come to me. So you touched my olfactory. It was,
Oh my God.
It was like a garden. It was just beautiful. And I know everyone agrees. I could just see the comments. Thank you so much. I'm laughing because it was just wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. And did you want to say something about Pip before we close?
Yeah, unless you'd like to, by all means.
No, you go ahead. You're the one with all the information.
I'm just going to give, an advertisement for tomorrow. As Sister Gayatri mentioned, after 3 years online, we are, 2.5 years online, we are now back live with Peace in the Park, which is done in conjunction with the UN and a number of other organizations. It's going to be back in Central Park at the Nürnberg Bandshell. It is tomorrow between 12 noon and 7 p.m. And it is a coterie of performers and meditation and interfaith clergy that come and well-known people, and even the fire department's going to be there, you name it. And we have children's, there are activities for children and adults, and we have, as we mentioned, laughter, yoga. There's just one path. It's one purpose, one people, one peace, all of us together. That's really what this is about tomorrow. I know you will definitely take benefit. if you come. I hope you can. And next week, we start a new conversation, and is love born from true understanding for the month of August. It is Rakshaban. We're going to be told Rakshabandhan. So next week will be the promise of protection with our very own Sister Anjani. So we hope we see you next week. Om Shanti, and thank you all, Sister Gayatri and Brother Eric, and all of you, our wonderful audience, and of course the Supreme Soul could not be here without him. So thank you so much, all of you, and Om Shanti. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you again, Sister Gayatri, for joining us on Harmony House Insight every Thursday. We'll be here next week, and may your path always be straight. All you pilgrims, we appreciate you attending here tonight, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. I say
Okay. Bye.
bye-bye. Thank you.